So thank you again. This is our webinar from Predictive Insight to Action, Cybersecurity and Vendor Third-Party Risk. This webinar will feature security experts from SecurityScorecard and Aravo as they provide strategies and best practices for managing the cybersecurity vulnerabilities associated with vendors, suppliers, and third-party risk. Today's agenda is as follows. We'll lead off with Phil presenting a snapshot of the cybersecurity landscape with consideration to third-party risk management. Then with Phil, we'll move to an overview of how SecurityScorecard provides significant cyber risk insights. Then we will hand off to Dave Rusher for a demo with how SecurityScorecard and Aravo integrate and how this can turn cyber risk insights into action. Then we will end with Q&A. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. We have Phil Marshall. He's Director of Product Marketing at SecurityScorecard. Phil's a security industry veteran with more than 17 years experience in both network and data security. At SecurityScorecard, he oversees the company's go-to-market strategy and partnership with the product management organization. Prior to joining SecurityScorecard, Phil worked at security firms Black Duck, CryptZone, Rapid7, and RSA. Phil has served as a subject matter expert at industry events, including ISC2 and ISA-CA conferences. He has presented on topics such as network-based access control, identity security, application security, and open source governance and management. Our second speaker is Dave Rusher. Dave has over 20 years experience working with large global enterprises to find the right solutions to complex business problems. His experience in the enterprise software industry spans across most functional areas of business, including engineering, product management, product marketing, solutions consulting, and executive leadership. As Aravo Solutions Senior Vice President of Product Strategy and Alliances, Dave works closely with Global 2000 customers to define and deliver best-in-class enterprise third-party risk management solutions that can scale to the business size, complexity, and change requirements of large multinationals. He's also responsible for partner alliances, which has included pioneering work in building community utilities third-party risk management applications for the defense and financial services industries in the UK. I want to thank both of our expert speakers for sharing their insights today. So without further delay, we'll hand the controls over to Phil and he'll begin our presentation. Phil, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thanks, Dave, for the great introduction. So let me just start by saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could say that the cyber risk landscape is becoming less of an issue and that companies worldwide have put processes and tools in place to diminish the threat of breach? In essence, that companies are winning this battle, but in particular, in the area of third-party security, the numbers are quite frankly getting worse, and we'll review some of what our findings are. And I'll also interlace some industry studies. And if you're interested in more information on access to these studies, please contact us, and we'll make sure to give you the URLs for some of these. For instance, according to the Verizon 2017 data breach report, 75%, up from 70% last year, of breaches are a result of issues around third-party security. So let's take a look at some of the specific issues that affect the security of vendor ecosystems. So you'd think that with cost factors, emerging regulations, and the percent of breaches caused by weak security profiles of third parties, that by now most companies would be taking decisive action. Well, the fact is that some of them are, and for some of the specific reasons. First, cost of a breach. The costs are literally staggering. Data breaches continue to escalate, and costs of breaches are predicted to exceed $2 trillion by 2019, and that's according to Juniper Research. And the average cost of a single breach is more than $4 million, which is an estimate by Poneman Institute. The 2/3 of data breaches attribution to third-party vendors is a number that we came up with, and that's from one of our white papers that you can access from SecurityScorecard's site. So here's a recent snapshot of how 18 major industries measure up in terms of their cybersecurity performance or preparedness. And when we look at the recent data exposed through the SecurityScorecard platform, we can gain a better feel for industry performance. What you may find surprising is that even though, for instance, the financial services industry scores really well overall, they as a group still suffer from attack, partly because they're such a rewarding target for hackers, I don't think it's surprising that you can see education performing rather low, but you'd think the technology sector would be better. But what we find is that when we look at particular risk factors, there is some level of differentiation from one industry to another. So let's take a look at that. So in 2016, the financial services sector was attacked 65 times more than any other sector. Again, not surprising. Malware events, though, corresponding to endpoint security issues are still very much an issue within this sector, and we do see that when we look at industry-level scoring. So application security is a tough area of cybersecurity risk control, really for all industries, but this is an example of an industry, i.e. the retail industry, that has begun to perform worse. We looked at some data ranging from about July through October of last year, and you can see that overall industry average went down along with retail, but then as of the August-September timeframe, retail simply didn't put the appropriate measures in place. So this is just an example of some of the data that we're able to pull from our platform. So this one is particularly vexing. 80% of attacks use vulnerabilities for which patches already exist. So some risk factors, such as patching cadence, they appear to be rather obvious, right? Hackers don't need to pay special attention based on this data to exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities when we look closely at the average delay of a company applying patches, which when we looked at the platform recently, I dove into a particular large international bank and found that their cadence averaged over 1,000 days. So that's a bit frightening, as one might think, because that's an awful lot of vulnerabilities exposed just across their application suite. So we also, in a recent report, surveyed 500 of the largest publicly traded U.S. companies. And again, on patching cadence, because I just like to harp on this. But just within this group, there are over 100 million issues just in the last 6 months. And size doesn't seem to matter, as patching cadence is by no means a strong suit for larger organizations versus smaller. And perhaps it's just due to the number of applications, and that applying patches sometimes requires, or usually can require, planned system downtime. But what seems like an obvious area for due diligence just is not ringing true. So I'm not sure if this is true of your organizations, but it might be something to certainly take a look at as a relatively obvious area in which organizations can improve their security profiles. So how does the proliferation of the Internet of Things change risk profiles? Here's an example passed along by a friend of mine who just happens to be in the logging business, as in cutting trees down and selling them. So increasingly, the equipment is becoming very sophisticated and expensive, and it's used by loggers connected to the manufacturer so that the factory can send instant alerts when the equipment is malfunctioning, along with recommended repairs. So you know what I'm going to say, right? In order to make it easy for all of the different operators to log into the user interface on each piece of equipment, they haven't changed the default passwords since they bought the equipment. So how easy would it be for someone to find their way into the manufacturer's systems, and unless proper security tools are in place, to then laterally move across their network? So again, the IoT landscape just opens up that many more options for third-party risk, especially when it comes to third-party and actually customer risk, depending on what your organization does. So kind of to summarize third-party risk challenges, what are common risk factors seen by the analyst community? So Nick Hayes, he's a senior analyst with Forrester Research, recently articulated these following challenges with third parties. Again, I'd like to say that we're seeing signs of improved preparedness, and in some cases, organizations are becoming more adept at reducing the effort around assessing vendor risk and are doing a better job working with vendors to improve their ecosystem risk management profiles. So we do see signs of improvement, but again, these are five issues to really pay attention to. So Dave, let me turn it over to you for a second for the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for sharing your insights. And as we begin the next section, as part of the solution to address third-party risk challenges, Phil's going to spend a few minutes talking about how the SecurityScorecard platform addresses this. He'll walk you through how you can instantly identify high-risk vendors that you may not have the resources to audit annually, and how SecurityScorecard's collaborative features can help vendors remediate vulnerabilities. Phil, perhaps you can start by framing up the problem that you solve at SecurityScorecard.
SecurityScorecard addresses a serious and ever-increasing liability for organizations by simply providing vendor and partner security profile ratings that provide significant insight into cyber risk represented by hundreds and perhaps thousands of vendors within many organizations' ecosystems. For instance, with SecurityScorecard, organizations can know how susceptible they are to a breach and exfiltration of data, both personally identifiable information, protected health information, or PHI, and what we like to call crown jewel corporate digital assets, based on, and this is really the key, continuous monitoring of 10 key risk factors that are predictive of potential breach. What's interesting is that your network used to be just that. It was you. In the not so old days, your organization's security was your organization's security. You used firewalls and other network and application security tools to secure your perimeter. And I wrote a blog not too long ago to say that the perimeter is dead. But anyway, to guard servers and endpoints from the exploitation of vulnerabilities. Your organization's security now also depends on how secure your entire ecosystem is. And this, while it appears a bit complex, is rather simplified diagram of an ecosystem. For instance, most financial service companies now have a complex and huge supplier partner ecosystem. There are third parties, fourth parties, lots of different vendors supplying many different products and services, and they have varying rates and degrees of access into your network. And the current state for most of these companies is broken. Most enterprise third-party security programs still rely entirely on manual point-in-time, largely subjective assessments to evaluate and manage the security risk of their third parties. These certainly still play a role in an important run. In many cases, the process of using tools like questionnaires, pen tests, site visits really has not adapted well to this new world where confidential data is really everywhere. Vendors and partners have trusted access and risk is now decentralized. As at best, programs to using these tools can only scale to maybe assess 15 to 20% of third-party ecosystems, usually just the highest risk vendors. So this leaves a large area of unmanaged risk, resulting in really no visibility at all into security programs at maybe 80 to 90% of vendor ecosystems, no continuous monitoring and proactive collaboration with high-risk vendors. So what happens is security goes sideways in one of your high-risk vendors between annual assessments and you don't know about it. So it's really important to have this continuous monitoring, especially of tier one vendors. And there's also compliance now to think about, especially with the onslaught of GDPR. Regulators are now shining a bright light on third-party programs. How are you going to show a level of due diligence that you're doing enough? So at a high level, how does SecurityScorecard work? SecurityScorecard continuously identifies, monitors, and assesses vulnerabilities to build and update an organization's security risk profile. We have patented sensors and collect 80% of the data ingested by the platform, non-intrusively observing millions of security signals and gathering critical data points from every addressable IP across the internet. The remaining 20% of our data is collected from trusted open source and commercial threat intelligence feeds. All of this input is analyzed, normalized, and most importantly, attributed by advanced machine learning algorithms on SecurityScorecard's threat market engine. So basically, looking at the 4 layers, let me walk you through our proprietary stack. We've invested millions and about 3.5 years into collecting and developing our own data collection and processing platforms, which is a real differentiator in our space. We hold 5 US patents and have filed several more. So let's looking from the bottom up at the data collection layer. Starting there, we have built a proprietary collection of sensors and software which continuously observe millions of security signals every day across the entire IPv4 space, i.e. the internet. So our R&D team continuously innovates on the techniques, and this allows us to collect the deepest and broadest set of interesting security signals really in the marketplace. Next up is our, under the vulnerability search engine, what we call threat market. It's at this step where we process and curate the data in an internal big data platform that we call threat market. We normalize the data, remove noise from signals, and organize it in relevant security silos. The system also does global IP attribution, which allows the platform to calculate which internet-facing IP addresses belong to which companies. So it's still an imperfect art, but incredibly important for our organizations to understand where and how their risk profiles have come into play. So next is the factor grades and overall grade. So since our platform now has a huge library of continuously updated threat signals, we organize those into 10 factors and attribute it to over 100,000 different companies. And then we apply a scoring algorithm to each company, which gives it an overall A to F letter grade. We also have factor letter grades, which are a benchmark score comparing the relative security risk of any given company to its peer group. So we look at peer groups of companies so that it's relevant. And our SaaS platform then displays all of the company scorecards and organizes the data for effective monitoring, reporting, and management of third parties. So I know that was a rather in-depth. Happy to discuss that in more depth offline if companies want to do that. So now you're empowered to take prompt action. So basically, three areas. You're now able to show due care with regulators. You're able to reduce third-party breach risk by analyzing and then working with your vendors to remediate. And you're able to scale your third-party security program without adding additional resources. And then for new vendors, our ratings are really useful in the RFP stage without full questionnaire process, or just simply to enable faster contracting and onboarding. Because clearly, if you are onboarding a company with strong scores, say A to B range, you might treat them differently from a company that's scoring a weaker basis. So it's pretty interesting, but also pretty clear. And it's also, you can push our scores and executive reports up to your executive team and board. So what will be interesting over the next few slides is to see how we're integrated with Aravo and how SecurityScorecard's ratings can be used in reports, searches, and displayed within visualizations and on dashboards. So next, let's hear Dave speak about how Aravo capabilities then address the value of integrating the platforms. Dave, do you want to take it over?
Certainly. Thank you, Phil. Dave Rusher will now share a little bit about Aravo and how the Aravo and SecurityScorecard integration turns these cyber risk insights into action. So Dave, if you're ready, you may now begin your presentation.
Thanks for the introduction, Phil, and thanks for the lead in. Just a real brief overview in terms of the solutions that Aravo provides to the market. We're a platform that primarily focuses on automating your risk, compliance, and performance processes as you conduct due diligence against the third parties or the supplier relationships that you're engaging into your business. And we do this across a broad set of risk domains, including information security and cybersecurity, which we'll take a look at in just a few minutes. The platform itself is designed to automate these processes across the broad range of third parties that exist within your ecosystem. That diagram that Phil presented a few slides ago about how it's important for you as buyers to understand your direct third-party relationships, but increasingly their relationships with subcontractors or other fourth and fifth or nth parties. All of those relationships that they exist ultimately can culminate in potential risk to your own organization based on the services that they're delivering and the nature of each relationship. And so our platform helps collect that data and present you with visibility to all those relationships and how that risk cascades through those relationships and ends up landing within your own organization to mitigate. Our platform also offers you some governance around those programs that dictate which of your third-party relationships should be subjected to what types of actions and processes and due diligence in the system. And as Phil was describing, the SecurityScorecard platform, Aravo is also a SaaS-based cloud platform, highly flexible data model, a very mature framework for integrating third-party risk intelligence sources, much like SecurityScorecard, into the platform to assist all of the broad stakeholders in your organization gain visibility into the information they need to make informed decisions. So Aravo also is a company that's been around and doing this type of work for companies for a long time. We're a stable and profitable organization. We've been around since 2000, headquartered in San Francisco in the city. We've got a lot of large customers. Most of our clients are household names. General Electric is a great example of one of those companies that we've been working with for going on a decade now in terms of helping them vet and risk manage and onboard their various suppliers and third parties. Recently, as the market that we're pursuing, this third-party management market has evolved, we're starting to get a lot more recognition for the work that we've done by analyst organizations like Chartis and their risk tech for third-party risk management solutions as a leader. Gartner recently identified us as a challenger in the IT vendor risk management space as well. We work a lot and closely with GRC 2020 as an organization. They're interesting in that they do a lot of in-depth work for us with our clients in the conduct of case studies and white papers on the real results that our clients are seeing from the deployment of our solution. And I'd just like to mention before we move on from the slide that you'll see a couple of great additional pieces of research coming out on the space, but Aravo is included in that by Spend Matters. They just recently conducted a 3-part series on Aravo, as well as they do a holistic solution map for all the different vendors in this space. And Forrester's Supplier Risk and Performance Management Wave report has recently been available. And I would invite you guys to look at that to see about how the market is evolving and how all the different solutions in the market play together with one another. Now, the reasons that companies come to Aravo and choose our solution have to do with the complexity and the scale of the challenge in managing these broad and deep third-party relationships in their organization. So we've been focused on providing our clients with a scalable solution that enables them to address these relationships on average with 84,000 different third parties who they depend on to do some element of their business throughout the delivery of their products and services. And on average, we've got a broad stakeholder community of users within the Aravo solutions of about 2,800 users. And so the solution is designed to kind of permeate your organization and put that information at the most appropriate stakeholders' disposal to do with what they feel best in terms of making decisions or executing actions at the appropriate stage in a relationship. But the solution also works quite well for smaller organizations or regional deployments within large companies. You don't have to have 85,000 third-party relationships or 3,000 users to take advantage of the Aravo platform. The other element to these programs is complexity. Increasingly, companies that are trying to manage and conduct due diligence on their third-party relationships are heavily reliant on third-party risk information providers. A great example of those, especially for information security and cybersecurity, are our friends at SecurityScorecard. But there are many other risk intelligence providers out there for different types of information, whether it's responsible sourcing, sustainable procurement, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, number of different risk domains that may come into play when you're evaluating or monitoring your relationship with a third party. And so the Aravo platform is designed to enable you to get feeds from all these different inputs and incorporate those actively into your relationship management processes. So that's another really good reason that companies come to us. And the final reason, although it's probably the most important one here, is just the constant change that's required to support the evolving regulatory environment, the requirements within your own organization around compliance and risk tolerance and risk appetite. These programs are constantly changing, and you need a solution that enables you as an organization to adapt itself to those processes as necessary without disrupting your business. And so we've made it our challenge for us as a provider in this space to get our solutions up and running quickly for our clients, but then enabling you to keep them fresh and agile throughout their life cycle to address change as required. So the integration that we're going to take a look at today with SecurityScorecard is really bringing each of our respective solutions together to do what each of us do best. I mean, I kind of see SecurityScorecard out there as the beacon in the market. It's monitoring, it's watching for all these types of risks that could exist for companies on whom you're dependent. And they have a lot of these great ratings, and they're monitoring change and risk. And what Aravo can do is take the results of all that great work they're doing and turn it into action for your business. So as you see ratings change, or as you see them dip into a dangerous level or an area of concern, you can use the Aravo platform to take action on them, implement a mitigative activity, notify the third party of the challenge that you've identified and potentially what the fix might even need to be. So it's taking this great information and data and analyses that SecurityScorecard are providing and turning it into action within the Aravo platform. We take advantage of all those company ratings as well as the factors, those deeper level ratings that SecurityScorecard provides, and we combine them with other valuable data that the Aravo platform have enabled you to collect about your third parties. We'll take a look at this dashboard in a moment, but you can see that the SecurityScorecard company rating is just one of the inputs that we would be evaluating in terms of risk or visibility about the third-party relationship. It's an important one, and we consume the output of their ratings as a native piece of content. So as you're looking at it within Aravo, it looks just like any other of the factors or risk information or data would look that you've collected into the platform. And in addition to those visualizations that you're seeing there in the form of the dashboard on the left, we surface access to and visibility to the scorecards directly within the supplier's profile, and I'll show that live in a moment. It's not just the overall grade. We can provide visibility by linking directly to the detailed scorecard in the SecurityScorecards platform. That action we talk about, the core strength of the Aravo solution is automating these processes for our clients. What we're seeing here is, a typical kind of third-party registration process. A part of that process has to do with IT risk management or IT due diligence. And what we're showing here is, as a course of that process, we've embedded an integration with SecurityScorecard. So we're going to collect some information from your internal stakeholder. We're going to have a questionnaire probably be responded to by someone at the third party themselves. And we're going to take that data and combine it with the output from SecurityScorecard to make decisions and identify issues. And that's what we take a look at it as a subsequent process here. If we find issues or areas of concern, you chain these processes together to automate the life cycle. So you've got the due diligence process, you've got risks and issues or findings identified, and against those issues and findings, you may actually assign corrective actions that need to be applied either by internal stakeholders or by the third party themselves. And so all of this information is important and can be triggered based on those ratings that we're getting back from SecurityScorecard and other third-party risk management or third-party risk intelligence providers. So let's take a look at kind of what we'll see here real quick in this demonstration. We'll show you the way the information looks coming into the system. We'll show you how you can link or how the third-party profiles are linked between Aravo and a detailed SecurityScorecard itself. And then we'll give you a brief overview of what the taking of an assessment might look like. And that part of the equation is important. ultimately you are going to need to assess third parties, especially those that might have a D or an F score as their grade coming in. And so we typically try to rely on best practice standards like the shared assessment SIG or SIG Light, depending on the degree of concern, to automate that assessment process and collect valuable information that can be used to identify and resolve issues that you might have as a result of the company grades. And the value, again, of the process here is that it's performing these activities on a continuous basis within Aravo. It's not just doing it during the registration or the onboarding process. It's doing it at your discretion with a frequency that you feel comfortable and acting on change as required, and can be also invoked on demand by anyone within your organization as they engage a new contract or want to use that third party within a different business unit. As an example, you can embed these checks and these integrations to SecurityScorecard at any part of that process. So very holistic integration there. So let's quickly, I'll transition, and we're going to keep this demonstration high level because I really just want to kind of give you visibility into the overall Aravo platform, the look and feel, and get you high-level information about the integration with SecurityScorecard. And we're happy to get into that in more depth at any time as a follow-on activity here. So what we're seeing here is a series of dashboards. In this particular example, it's a set of dashboards that correspond to information security visualizations. Every user within the Aravo system would have access to potentially a different set of these dashboards corresponding to their responsibility within your business. Let's take a look at the information security one. You'll see there's a lot going on this particular dashboard. It's giving us visibility into all those third-party relationships on a global basis. Very valuable for helping identify in one quick look at your concentration risk associated with where your third-party relationships exist, as an example. You take a look at the different types of third-party relationships that you have, or the classification categorization of those particular third parties. Are they strategic? Are they tactical? Is it a direct third party? Is it a distributor? So all of these different types of relationships can be tracked and managed within the system, and interacting with these visualizations enables you to use them as filtering mechanisms, active filtering within Aravo. We just highlight here on this geographic view here in the upper left, I can see I drilled into Europe. I've got a concentration of third-party relationships here in the UK. So I'll filter down even farther on those. You can see all the other information on the dashboard is changing and updating based on that filtering that I've provided. And I can see, I got several different types of relationships. A few of them are going through risk mitigation activities at the moment. We've got a good distribution of high and medium and low risk associated with those third parties. And you can ultimately scroll down here and we see the SecurityScorecard, the overall grades associated with a few of these third parties. I'm going to drill in one further here and just get us down to a company that I'm particularly familiar with. So I drilled again into the segment of the SSC overall grades to those with an A rating. And in that, all those associated visualizations on that page were updating as I was navigating and using as active filtering and searching to guide my navigation. And what we're looking at here is the actual Aravo profile within the Aravo system. So you've got all the identifying information, where we're located, if we had any relationships to subcontractors, or if we had parent companies or other owned companies, all those relationships would be visible to me right here in this profile. You see another geographic location and presentation. We're integrating with Google for geocoding purposes. That enables us to drive all these visualizations. That's another example of an integration that we do actively within the system. So we know where these locations are. You get a good visualization as a part of your due diligence effort there. Ultimately, we'll scroll down and see where that, in this case, we have retrieved the SecurityScorecard overall company grade of an A for Aravo, and I can actually drill in here and get a more detailed view. So we're not always, we're not displacing your use of SecurityScorecard, especially not for your information service and security professionals in your business. They may continue using it and gaining value from it, using it in depth for what it is that they do. But what we're doing is pulling the relevant parts of their research into Aravo and making that available for other stakeholders, and again, subjecting it to a range of processes that we might have in place to conduct due diligence, manage our risk, etc. And one thing that I wanted to focus on here, we mentioned that information security risk is one important element of risk that exists. I'm showing a risk scorecard within Aravo today to give you some illustration that we manage a wide variety of risk domains through our platform today. We've seen how we can track and identify geographic risk, and we tie into Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index to identify potential areas of concern there. We can manage the service and product risk there. So what type of a product or service are you using from these companies? And we model all different types of taxonomies there, UNSPSC, NAICS, SIC codes. Our companies use a variety of different ways there. And you can see down here how the incorporation of that company grade from SecurityScorecard, we're pulling it right into the overall risk model for this third-party relationship in our business. And I wanted to do it this way to illustrate to you how we take all the different forms of risk that exist. Financial risk might be coming in from an integration to D&B. As an example, we're combining that with the information security risk that's coming in from SecurityScorecard, and all of those various factors ultimately roll up to the overall risk posed to your organization by that third-party relationship. And this is a pretty straightforward and simple example of a risk model within Arava. They can be much more complex. They can be a lot more broad. It all just depends on kind of the scope of your program and the scope of the third-party ecosystem that you're conducting due diligence against. Real quickly, I wanted to review, we talked a little bit about the process that we saw in the system. Let's take a look. I'll give you an example of let me get a different third party here, because I'm going to actually show you one of these assessments that are in place. So I'm going to look at a company called Brittany Consulting. This is an example of the search that exists within Aravo. Really quick and performant. I can get right into a third party. You'll see that their profile is very similar to what we saw again with Aravo Solutions. But interestingly, on these guys, they've got an active process going on. And they've got an active process going on here as a result of an engagement that's been requested of that third party. And so we want to take a look at that IT risk management process and the various steps that exist and all of the information that have been collected. We showed this in the presentation, this flow chart of processes in execution within the platform. And we can see here that right now, this IT risk management process is in place. We're ultimately going to reach out and grab the SecurityScorecard scores, a part of this process. But the important bit that I wanted to show you here is that the third party is actually in the process of responding to an IT risk management questionnaire. It's leveraging shared assessments SIG as the format for that assessment. And I just wanted to real quick give you some visibility into these extended parts of the Aravo platform that leverage that integration. You can envisage a scenario where you've got a company that you're considering doing business with. They've got one of those weaker security scores, a D or an F, and you may use that score to trigger this information security assessment going out to that third party for completion and review. And we'll just go quickly through this. You can see that, based on the type of relationship here, the system has identified all the appropriate sections for the shared assessments SIG-Lite questionnaire that they're required to respond to. There's some conditional display going on. I won't go through every page here, but you can see that dependent on their responses to the SIG, do you have a policy for this? If so, upload it. So you're gathering their declarations and responses. You're also gathering their evidence, all of this being conditionally driven and dynamic within the platform so that you're getting the appropriate experience to correspond with the level of risk that's been identified. So you're not forcing people to go through sections of questionnaires or assessments that don't apply to their relationship. And so with that, Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We've got about 15 minutes left, and so this might be an appropriate time. Like I said, I'll turn control back over to you if we want to open it up and address any questions that folks may have submitted through the course of the session today.
Excellent. Yeah, let's definitely jump in there. I want to thank you guys for sharing your valuable insights there. Before we jump into some questions, just want to remind the audience that you can still submit questions through the questions pane. We're going to try and get to as many as we can, but any ones that we can't get to live here, we will follow up with an email back out to you to make sure that we're answering those questions. But first question, I know you actually just touched on, we were having a lot of questions about standardized assessments. You had talked about SIG. Can you kind of address that a little more in terms of which standardized assessments both Aravo and SecurityScorecard are able to use within the platform and the integration?
Yeah, I'll take the lead on that. This is Dave with Aravo. I mean, the most practical one, or the most common one that we see here in terms of this domain, this risk domain and area, would be the shared assessments, SIG Lite and SIG Full, right? The standard information gathering model. And I know that SecurityScorecard have also kind of aligned their scoring algorithms and reports with that as a standard. So Aravo can automate the responses to all of that, and SecurityScorecard can produce a result that might align findings that they have, or ratings that they have found, or issues that they've identified with the specific sections of the SIG that would apply to that particular third party. So that's a great example of one for information security. In particular, cybersecurity also spans some data privacy areas, including GDPR as of the most recent release of the SIG just last month of this year. So it's a pretty comprehensive assessment model, and we've had some pretty good success with that and our clients. So I'll stop talking, Phil, if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, my only add there is that we'll be doing a series of webinars this year on frameworks and compliance. So stay tuned. There's a lot in this area, and you're right, we do align with SIG, but we're also aligned and creating more information around that address specific frameworks like HIPAA, and several of the financial frameworks as well. So yeah, exactly. Thank you.
And Dave, you had just mentioned GDPR. Our next question is about GDPR specifically. Has the upcoming GDPR deadline created more interest in SecurityScorecard or Aravo, either in the US or EMEA?
Yeah, I'll grab that one first. It has, in fact. I've been at a number of conferences lately, and it comes up everywhere. I was recently speaking with a CISO from one of the large hospital networks in New Hampshire, and he indicated that he's getting questions on this daily. Basically, they're associated with a particular medical school, and for those medical students who are from other countries, obviously their data will be subject to GDPR rules and the overall regulation. And my pet peeve of today, I suppose, was patching cadence. And just with patching cadence alone, looking at the various articles within GDPR that pertain, Articles 25, 24, 32, 35, and 39. So there's just a lot of chatter about GDPR and making sure that organizations really are paying attention, especially because when you think about your data, that whether that's HR data or customer data, it doesn't matter whether it's living within your perimeter or not, or within any number of third parties that you're working with. It's still your data. So liabilities will extend no matter where that data lives. So it's I think it's a very interesting and crucial area to ready yourselves for.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment, Phil. From us on the Aravo side, we've seen an increase in demand and conversations that we're having. And I would say it's not just with European-based companies or companies that are in the EU. We've got a couple of large programs going on with U.S.-based organizations, obviously, since they collect and process data on EU citizens. It was driving a lot of focus on their business. And so we've seen it across the board. And again, I think it's important to note that just because your company isn't based in the EU, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have some substantial risk or the need to conduct some pretty sophisticated due diligence and manage that process associated with the data that especially your data processors are managing on your behalf. So that's the scope, especially with what we've been talking about today in terms of third-party risk management, is those data processors that you've got to really have a specific scope of focus on for your GDPR program as it pertains to being in compliance with your third-party relationships there.
Excellent. On to the next one. This one's an audience one as well from Mike M. And Mike would like to know, do you take third-party inputs into account for your reviews? Things such as SOC 2 Type L reports provided by the third parties.
Yeah, we certainly do. I mean, the SOC 2s and various different certifications, inclusive of various different types of insurance certificates, liability insurance, public liability insurance, indemnification policies, ISO 27000X, and all the various different certifications and audits that third parties might have collected. We collect those as evidence in the platform. And the important thing that I would say there is that, we don't necessarily want to recollect all that data in the form of an assessment within Aravo. Oftentimes, it's important just to collect the completed audit certificate that they have and ask a little bit of information about it. Who conducted the audit? When was the audit conducted? Is it subject to follow-up, corrective actions, et cetera? So we can instrument all of that in Aravo, but quite often if they've had one that's been completed, it's just the collection and storage of it for your own review and collecting validity dates and the certifying body that conducted it. All of that can factor in very effectively to your risk management and risk mitigation activities. So the short answer is yes. And then the type of documents and certificates and certifications that we collect is pretty broad. And again, the important thing there is that automating and tracking the expiration of or the validity of those certificates is a key use case for the Aravo platform on behalf of our clients.
Phil, anything to add there or move on to the next question?
No, I think you move on. I mean, obviously, we're an outside-in platform, so any data that we're collecting is not based on internal determinants.
Absolutely. Moving on to one from Lisa S. This is a question about continuous monitoring. How does the system support continuous monitoring for critical events or significant changes in ratings?
You want me to grab that first? So what happens with our scoring is if a particular set of issues within a factor and then within the overall grade or within that factor grade affect the overall grade, alerts can be sent out to that particular vendor, and that vendor, if you've invited them into the platform, has full view of their complete scorecard down to and including IP and explanation of just what that vulnerability is, so that our customer success team then works very closely with that vendor to remediate. Hopefully that helps to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, on the Aravo side, it can take a variety of flavors. I mean, obviously, you're going to have your information security or cybersecurity specialists that are probably using SecurityScorecard as their primary solution for monitoring, watching what's going on. But in the event that actions occur, we saw just really quickly how if something like that were to happen, that same individual could log in quickly to Aravo and initiate a mitigating activity, go do an IT risk assessment, or execute whatever control has been identified within your organization in the event that their overall grade changes significantly, or that one of the critical factors, you talked a little bit about patching cadence today, maybe that's a critical one for the type of service that you're leveraging from that third party. And so it can be as simple as that, and often it is the use of these two platforms and ensuring that the various stakeholders have access to just the right functionality within each to execute the appropriate action. Some of our customers have a little more sophisticated integration of these platforms that might include taking feeds from these systems on an hourly basis to in some cases, to a daily basis in others, so that you're refreshing kind of the set of information that may have changed over that period, refreshing it in Aravo, and Aravo can then execute any process within our platform. Again, you typically correspond that with a control framework that you've got for the critical elements of the service that you want to manage and mitigate. So it can take many different flavors, and it often does, but those are some examples.
Excellent. Moving on, Lillian has a question and would like to know, are there any third parties that the system is not able to evaluate based on location, industry, et cetera?
From the security scorecard standpoint, what we do find is, well, currently we've scored approximately 150,000 different companies. What we are working on, and is a roadmap issue, is working on making sure that smaller companies' scorecards are appropriately populated. Because, as you might imagine, some of the risk factors are less prevalent the smaller the company is. So it's a work in progress. But I will say that in most cases, we're able to populate a scorecard within approximately 24 hours as we collect the data points and do the attribution of the IPs across those companies that you're adding to your portfolio.
I mean, from the Aravo perspective, there isn't any real limitation in terms of companies from a geographic or industry perspective to which we can engage. I think last count we had our solutions deployed in production in over 30 languages. So we have some companies that run some pretty sophisticated global programs and assessments, and so they're leveraging more than 30 languages in localized questionnaires and assessments for their third parties in close to 200 countries. So that gets us pretty close to the total number of at least UN identified and recognized countries. So we're not aware of any limitations today, and we've got pretty good examples of use around the globe.
So the next one is coming from Scott, and this one can probably be answered in a few ways, but it says, can SecurityScorecard help us literally predict which vendors/partners might be breached? So it might be more for you, Phil, on the predictive nature of what SecurityScorecard, what those ratings are telling their customers.
The short answer is yes, but understand that. But I do want to be cautious here, and that is that, and by saying that an organization with an A rating could be breached tomorrow, and an organization with an F rating might not be breached for the next 3 years. It is predictive to an extent that we can provide you with an organization's scoring based on our algorithms across these 10 risk factors, and organizations can dig into exactly what those vulnerabilities are and in fact how to address them. It certainly is associating risk with a particular vendor, and through our alert system you can then work with that vendor to remediate. What we will be developing over the coming few months through what we're calling breach insights is we'll be better able to be more specific and more predictive based on factor level analysis as to just how predictive a particular factor is and within a particular industry. So it's an area in which we're becoming more and more sophisticated. But yes, even with the platform as it exists today, it can be a valuable tool in your arsenal to help you with that process.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more here before the top of the hour. And just from each of you, if you could, how long does it typically take to implement your respective solutions, both on the SecurityScorecard side and the Aravo side? How long does it really take to get up and running and to start seeing value?
Yeah, I would say in a matter of days. I mean, as a SaaS solution, there's no on-site implementation deployment to be concerned about. There is the issue in that our most popular use case is indeed vendor risk management. So there's the process of working with our customer success team to advise you on how best to invite your vendors and to then work with them. As you might imagine, if a particular tier one vendor has a score of a D or an F, that might be a conversation that you want to handle delicately with that particular vendor. And we have a bunch of information on how to work that from a workflow standpoint. So, but essentially implementing the platform is simply a matter of days, but implementing and making sure that it's working effectively as a vendor risk management solution is a bit longer process.
Yeah, real quick, guys, on our side, from the Aravo perspective, it's a similar explanation to that which Phil described. Depending on the degree to which you want to leverage the pre-built out of the factory Aravo content in terms of the assessments and risk models, you can be up and running in days. It's a more common scenario for us here at Aravo that we deliver that for the benefit of our clients, and then we make some modifications to that align with their particular risk program, their controls framework, their governance approach. So the system itself can be deployed really quickly. The modeling of it to meet your unique requirements generally takes anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on how complex you want to implement the system.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. That takes us to the top of the hour. I want to thank Phil and Dave for your valuable insights from predictive insight to action, cybersecurity, and vendor third-party risk. I also want to thank all the participants for joining and your participation throughout the Q&A. Any of the questions that we did not get to, again, we will follow up on those. So thanks again for submitting that. To find out more about Aravo, you can visit us online at aravo.com. There is going to be a short survey that's going to go out after the session, so we appreciate your participation there as well. And with that, this concludes our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.